So in the amazing world of filmmaking, a lookup table, or a LUT, is a colour modifier between two images or frames. It's a really useful tool to achieve the first stages for your film's look. So at its very core, a LUT is basically a mathematical equation, and we simplify this down to R equals S plus L. R being the result that you want to attain, that final appearance. S is the source that you start with, that original footage. And L being the LUT, or the change needed to achieve your ideal colour grade. Now, one thing that's really important to remember is that a LUT shouldn't be used as a final grade. Instead, it's more of a tool for bridging that gap between your source footage and your end footage. You should always correct your colours and make sure everything matches up before you grade it and work with LUTs. And in this kind of breakdown, I'm going to be exploring how I build my own LUTs, because you can get loads of free ones online. But one thing I really wanted to do, especially with Bad People from a Dangerous Planet, is kind of look at a way that I can build my own LUT. So I'm going to be breaking down today how I would build a LUT using Photoshop, of all things. Now, it's quite simple. All you need is a frame from your film. So here I've taken the very first shot of Bad People from a Dangerous Planet, and we've got quite a pale light there, a green light on top of the antenna, and a few red lights poking down the horizon. And as you can see from where the coming in, there's quite a white bleed seeping between these buildings, and I want to do something that also creates a LUT and fixes some of the little problems in this film. Now, there's a really easy way to do this in Photoshop, and a lot of the times I see people adding adjustment layers, changing all the colours and tweaking it that way, and then exporting it directly as a cube file. Now, that's great, that's fine, that works for you, it's fine, but I found recently a new way, a different way of doing it, and I just love it. It's brilliant. It's like working then in Lightroom to really finesse your image, and then you can whack that out as a cube file to use as a LUT. So with this image, we're going to go up to Filter at the top here, and go onto Camera Raw Filter. Now, this will bring up a sort of Lightroom-esque dialog box, and we'll be able to work with all the colours and the wonderful things to do with this image. So one thing with this image is it feels a little bit, not bland, but just a bit too raw almost. It looks too much like I've just shot it and not done anything else with it. So I'm going to work with the basic corrections at the moment, and maybe just look at something like changing the tint just to get a little bit of blue in there. You can experiment with this with however you wanted, and bringing things like the yellow into it takes it even further away from those science fiction vibes, I feel. Although, to be fair, you could kind of bring it quite high up, all the way even up to 100%, maybe bring in a bit of red, and you've got almost something a little bit like Blade Runner desert vibes, or something a bit Mad Max-esque. Now, for me, that doesn't particularly work, and it's not what I'm going for with Bad People from a Dangerous Planet, especially with the opening credits and things like that, which I'll show you at a later point. So I kind of want to bring in these blue tones, but you don't want to overdo it all the time, because sometimes you bring it all the way down and that's just intense. That's too intense. I mean, look at your histogram up here. It's mad. So I want to bring it not all the way back to the middle, but just a little bit further in, maybe about 22, minus 22% there. I don't think that's too bad. And now let's have a look at the tint. Now, I quite like how the white is almost disappearing from down here when I change the tint, and it's giving this sort of purple hue to it, although the intensity is way too much. So one thing we're going to do is we're going to leave the tint kind of where it is, and just see if that works, and leave it there. Now, one thing you will want to look at is things like your exposure and your contrast. So, we bring this all the way down, we lose the, the brightness of the image. Bring it all the way up, and Mama Jesus, that's way too much. So I'm going to bring it a bit further down, maybe so about minus 0.2. I think that might work. Let's have a look at some of these highlights. You can just tweak these as you want. I'm doing these because I really want to finesse this image for this opening scene. So you can see here, I bring these highlights all the way up, and you lose this area here straight away. These arms of the building, these pillars, are instantly lost behind the fog. But you bring it all the way down, and because we're working with Camera Filter Raw, you get this clarity down there, and you can start to bring out things that you thought were lost when you first shot it. So, there's always a lot of data in your image that's hidden when you first shoot it. It's not until you start playing around with these dials and levers and whatnot, and then you get what you're going for. I don't want to change these drastically, so we'll leave those where they are. Now, one thing you shouldn't do when you're building a LUT using the camera raw filter is change your texture, your clarity, or dehaze anything. Purely because it doesn't work with the settings we're going to be working with and when trying to export that. So don't touch those by any means. Now, the opening scene of Bad People is quite exciting and exhilarating. You're supposed to feel, oh, wow, look at this terrible model world made by shampoo bottles and Lynx Africa. But at the same time, you want to almost feel threatened by it because it's not of this world. At the end of the day, it is alien. So whilst I might take the vibrance up a little bit, I might pull some of the saturation out just to get a bit of a nice balance there. There we go. So you can come across now into your curves and balance with them. See if you get some sort of nice output from it. Now, there's crushing blacks, and then there's crushing blacks like that. Don't do that. So I don't want to crush them massively, but I do want to take them away from this very flat vibe. So I want to bring some of these whites to a little bit more of a filmic style. So instead of it looking like it's just been blown on from a vape stick, which it was, I want it to look a little bit more chroma keyed on almost, in a very stylized way. So like there maybe. That works. I'm going to come across the detail, although you shouldn't, because you shouldn't be touching it. Don't touch sharpening. Don't touch noise reduction. Just leave it. You don't need it. Ignore that. So one of my favourite bits now is doing your hue, saturation and luminance adjustments, or HSL. And a bit of a slight magenta might just work a little bit better. Just a bit nicer for the eyes. But I want to change the luminance just to get a little bit of that sheen on it. And as you can see as I'm pulling away on like the edges of this building here, ever so slightly, it's just changing the intensity of that white light. And I quite like bringing that in. And we're going to leave that there. Okay, so now we're going to move across to split toning, which is kind of the middle tab on the camera raw section. Now this allows you to edit quite prominently your highlights and your shadows, and this is something I work with very prevalently in Lightroom to get these really vibrant and strong colour schemes in the photography I do. Now one thing you want to do straight away is bring your saturation up of your highlights, and this will immediately place a colour from this hue scale onto your highlights. And the highlights of this image are, of course, without saying, the whites. And that's coming from the backlight casting through the fog that's coming through, and it's bleeding all the way up here, around these lights, through these arms, and mainly down here, and especially on like this little bit of the building there. So when I bring this saturation up, you can see that changing. You don't want to always bleed it through all the way to 100% because it might look a little bit too overdone. So lens corrections, effects and calibration are something you can work with additionally to pop out your scene. So I might take just a little bit out. And now the important thing to do when exporting a LUT from this camera raw filter is you don't click OK at the bottom. Don't just go slapping that willy-nilly. You need to come over to the preset section here, and as you can see I've already built one yesterday. And it might be worth comparing the two in the actual cut. You know, build the rough cut, put the original elsewhere preset that I've made on here, and then compare it to the new one that we've done here and see which one works best. You know, it's all about personal preference. So we're going to go up to this little menu bar here, and we're going to click Save Settings. Ignore all this, that's fine. Everything needs to be ticked as it is. You want to make sure it's saving as an XMP file, which it should be, but just make sure. And we're going to call this one, because the original one was called Elsewhere, we'll call this one Greenware. So now, with that done, click OK. That's fine. And we're done with this image. Now, one thing you will need, and I'll put a link to this in the description, and that's a LUT generator from IWLTBAP. Now, it's a free piece of kit. It's fantastic. You just throw in your holds, and it generates into a cube, which is your LUT. So one thing we need to do now is generate this hold. So I'm going to click on there, and I'm going to save this to my desktop just so I can throw it in. So we'll pull it in here, and this is what your hold should look like. It's just a checkered board of colours and hues. Throw this into Photoshop. Go once again into the camera raw filter, and I'm now going to go into the presets section. And as you can see, I've got the Elsewhere one that I built yesterday and the Greenware one which we've just built now. So I'm going to add that to my hold, and you can see it's immediately changed all the colours, which is fine. That's exactly what we want. Go ahead and just save that image. It'll overwrite the neutral 512 that you've just generated, and close that off. And we're going to go into Convert to Cube, click on our hold file, and bish bash bosh. You should now have, and there we are, that is your LUT. I'm going to come across and put this in my movies folder, in my miscellaneous LUTs, So I've now got 2 LUTs that I've made, and I can experiment with them. They can be directly imported straight into Adobe Premiere, and you can also save them as built-in presets, so you don't have to go around importing them every time. There's a couple of really useful articles that I'm going to put reference links to in the description of this video. Feel free to check those out. They just explain in a little bit more detail what LUTs are and kind of the mathematical side of it and how things work. And I'm also going to include a little bit of an infographic that I've just whipped up as I use as a bit of revision, just to remind me exactly what the key features of a lookup table are. So in the next installment, we're going to be looking at building the rough cut of Bad People from a Dangerous Planet, and we'll be importing these LUTs to see how they work. And I hope to see you there. I will see you in the next video.